Good morning, everyone, or afternoon for many of you, if you're on the other side of the US on that East Coast. Today, we have our Words to Action program, and we are going to be talking about some good things when it comes to, here we go, sport conversations for change. Again, bringing this to you from the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change at San Jose State University in San Jose, California. Feel free to follow us on our social media outlets, our website, sjsuwordstoaction.com, Facebook, and Twitter. If you're following us via Twitter, follow us at hashtag SJSUWordsToAction. So again, greetings to everyone and welcome to the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change, this first digital platform and program on sport conversations for change. Today's conversation is also the first, and it's not a first, it's a third, if you will, in our series of conversations to discuss COVID-19. So we'll be hosting these conversations, and this, like I said, is our third one. I am your director of the Institute, Dr. Keino Carter-Francique, and as we stated, the Institute was created, if we hear here, just a little FYI, we can go back, there we go. Our Institute was created in 2017 with the goal to honor SJSU legacy and continue the dialogue about athlete activism and the influence of sport in affecting positive social change. Again, as our nation confronts and explores deeply complex social issues, such as this current pandemic that we're living in with COVID-19, it's critical that we continue to challenge the boundaries of sport and activism and affect social change. As we know, sport offers the occasion to pose big questions, not just of athletes, but also ourselves, and provide enlightened perspectives, and also, again, do that work. So our mission of the Institute, again, is dedicated to research, analysis, and education at the intersection of sport and society. So over the next hour, our sport conversation will encourage the opportunity for individuals to lift every voice, athletes, lived experiences, and mental health and coping in the age of COVID-19. This week's conversation is an opportunity for athletes at all levels, K-12 to college to amateur, to share their experiences and ask questions. We also welcome athlete coaches, advisors, family and friends, and members of that athlete support team to share their experiences and challenges to provide support for all of those during this COVID-19 time period. Again, mental health and coping models, strategies, culturally competent resources, training and certifications will also be shared. This is going to be a heavy resource-driven conversation today, so I'm so excited for all of the panelists that we have. As I'm introducing the panelists, want to find out who's in our audience so our panelists know who they're talking to. So take a moment to address our poll today and tell us who you are. Athlete, coach, parent. As we're looking, again, we have a great range of speakers on our panel today. First up is Lizette Goodloe. She's a Chief Operating Officer of Behind the Whistle LLC. She's currently is an education, well, I'm sorry, let me back up here. Behind the Whistle is an education consulting firm that provides professional development for pre-service and in-service educators, administrators, athletic administrators, student athletes, and parents. She's also the AVID coordinator at John Jay High School in San Antonio, Texas. This is her 16th year in education, having served as a head volleyball coach for 15 years and coaching various sports across the state of Texas. Lizette has a BA in communication from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, and a master's in educational leadership from the University of Texas Pan American. She is currently a student at the United States Sports Academy, where she's working on her doctorate in sports management with an emphasis in leadership. She's a proud mother and active growing boy, Omri, who I know, 8 years old, and proud wife of William Goodloe, who is also our passionate educator and another panelist. which brings me to him. William Goodloe, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Behind the Whistle. An English teacher and passionate champion for young people. He's committed to ensuring student athletes, coaches, parents, and officials have positive sport experiences. He believes in the development of the whole athlete as a central component of coaching and pursues the development of positive relationships with athletes as a foundation for coaching and learning success. He believes sports is an excellent opportunity to teach life skills. He earned his BA in English from the University of Incarnate Word, a master's degree from positive coaching from the University of Missouri, and is earning a doctorate as well at the sport management of the U.S. Sports Academy. So I bring you both of them. One final note, he said he's a self-proclaimed future Hall of Fame barbecue pit master. So I'm looking forward to having a plate sometime soon. So thank you again for joining us today. The Goodloes from Behind the Whistle. Also on our panel, we have back with us, Dr. Keino Miller. He's the Director of Mental Health and Follow-Up Care at Tulane. He's counseling and sports psychologist who serves, again, as that director for Tulane University of Medicine. He's experienced in administering comprehensive clinical assessment, treatment planning, and providing individuals and family counseling with current and former athletes. Dr. Miller specializes in issues impacting men and their families, focusing on a variety of concerns, including anxiety, depression, trauma, career, life transition, relationship issues, identity development, and athletic performance. He received his PhD in counseling psychology with a concentration on sports psychology from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. He's a native of Dallas, Texas, and he's been in this business for about 10 years, over 10 years, serving athletes at every developmental level. Then we have our in-house athletic personnel from a college level. First, we have Haley Eckerman. She's an assistant volleyball coach and recruiting coordinator at Tarleton State University. She was born and raised in Waterloo, Iowa. Wow, all the way out there, Midwest representing. Attended the University of Texas on a full ride scholarship. She was a 4-time All-American, 4-time Big 12 Player of the Year, 2012 national champion as well. After college, she went to play professionally overseas for 5 years in a range of countries from South Korea to Puerto Rico to Russia. After playing professional, she returned back to her hometown and was a head coach at a local high school. In 2019, she took over as the assistant coach again and recruiting coordinator at Lamar University, and then most recently became an assistant coach again and recruiting coordinator at Tarleton State this past March when all of this took place. So she's going to share a little bit of that transition with us today. We also have our very own San Jose State head swimming and diving coach, Sage Hopkins. He's in his 15th season as head coach at San Jose State. He was named the post full-time in April 2006 after serving 05-06 season as the interim head coach. Under his leadership, the Spartans enjoyed several of its best seasons ever. In 2012 and 13, he led the Spartans to their second conference win in a row and secured his 69th win as San Jose State's head coach and finished the season with a dual meet record of 9-1, improving his career record from 69, 25, and 1, all those wonderful stats. Individually, Hopkins was named the Western Athletic Conference Women's Swimming Coach of the Year, and Marissa DeWams, and help me if I said that name wrong, was named Athlete of the Year. She was she and 4 other Spartans went to compete in the 2012 U.S. Olympic team trials in Omaha. So he's going to share a little bit of that experience with us. Last and certainly not least is Irvin Lewis. He's the Senior Associate AD for Facilities and Operations at University of North Florida. He's a native of Monticello, Florida, and a former student athlete and graduate of Auburn University, graduating with a BS in Health Promotion and Business Administration with a Master's of Education in Higher Education Administration. He's a true advocate of education and has always served in the capacity of a teacher, professor, coach, administrator on every level of education for over 20 years. He's served on the NCAA Division I Administrative Cabinet and he's currently serving on the NCAA Division I Track and Field Committee. He's also a graduate of the NCAA Leadership Institute. So thank you all. I know it was a mouthful, but thank you all for joining us today. We can see a little bit about who we have on the line. We've got a few athletes, some athletic administrators, a few coaches, parents, and those that fall amongst our community supporters. So again, we thank you for joining us today. My first question to each and every one of you, if you could give us a little background, give us a little insight, what does sport mean to you?
Sport for me is a bridge in the community. It's between the people that are actually on campus and all of the stakeholders, everyone that's involved, and it allows for not only athletes and coaches, but athletic administrators to have a platform for anything that they want to accomplish or do.
I echo many of the things that Lizette just said, because I believe the sport's also a bridge it's a bridge between who it is you think you want to be and who you are. And it's a great vehicle if you use it properly to get to that point and beyond. So I guess it's an expressway really to the future.
Okay.
I've always kind of looked at it from a perspective, it's a means of developing a whole person. So from my perspective, you train the mind and body to excel through life's challenges. So higher levels of performance, I think, yield higher levels of self-esteem. And so those things to me are very positive.
All right.
From my end, I would say it's a form of self-expression, form of self-development, and it's something that also can bring people together.
Mm-hmm. Are your mic on? Irvin, we got to get your mic on. You're muted. There you go. Thank you.
I think it's a journey of the unknown and helping to develop oneself and their vision for what they want life to be and what life can be throughout the building of relationships along the way.
For me, I think it's, again, kind of how we just said, like your relationships and creating a person and your identity, especially for those who that's all they know is sports, and that's how they grew up. And so it's a way for you to live your life day by day and grow as a person.
Right. So with that said, that's really good insight to roll us into this topic today. We're going to focus on, again, this notion of lifting your voice, but being able to understand some of those challenges that our athletes have gone through. We've heard from news, so we know sort of the statistics as it relates to COVID, the number of deaths in this country, but I really wanted to get at some of the work that people are doing with these young people. So today our topics of interest is really kind of, again, to focus on high school, college, and amateur athletes. What are some of those issues and challenges that they're facing? Talk to us a little bit about some of the transition, and for some, the retirement as we think about those high school athletes from their sport. How are we supporting our athletes? What are some of those coping strategies that we're using? And what resources can you share for us today? And then finally, the mental health, well-being, and performance. Helping our audience be able to understand some of those models of support, some of the models as it relates to transition, and how do we perhaps obtain a sports psychologist, because we're seeing that as possible staple in our current situation, but something that can definitely help us maintain and manage our student athletes from the day they start working out with that coach and or team. So with that said, I'd really like to understand from the Goodloes, could you start us off, help us understand from your perspective, especially working with those high school athletes, what are the challenges that you're seeing at the high school level as it relates to them managing COVID-19 and this pandemic?
I think some of the biggest challenges right now are the senior athletes who completely lost their spring sport, and there's no recouping that. They will graduate from high school and move forward, and some of them have been working, the past their entire life, really, to get to this point as a senior. I think that some of the coaches are doing a good job with helping provide some mental health services. I know on our campus specifically, our social worker has set up a Google Classroom for all of our entire campus, not just our athletes, but providing resources. And I think we're in a unique situation on our campus because up till last week, we only had about 40% of our students had access to technology. So that's a big, big obstacle that we're having to deal with right now.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the nuances that kind of goes unspoken is that transition that my wife mentioned, but also the transition into being a breadwinner for some of the undocumented or the DACA students, athletes who have now turned into financial head of households and having to deal with the identity of being someone's child and now transitioning into the role of caregiver or caretaker. And so I think that, again, some of the great resources that are being provided by coaches across the state, but more specifically on our campus, have to do with the Google Classrooms and the Zoom meetings to check in, to make sure that they have the resources they need, because we work on a Title I campus where we have a lot of our students are low socioeconomic placement. And so just making sure they have Wi-Fi access, making sure they have food. The primary thing is food, because now people have more time than they do money. We're talking about people that have always lived kind of check to check. And so now when there's no check to live or look forward to, trying to make sure that they have some positive reinforcements and coping strategies, obviously. And so like our campus is using the Sports U app, which is promoted by the Texas High School Coaches Association. And they're also using those sessions just for kids to see their faces and just recognize that people care.
Okay. And one more question kind of going into that. We heard about what's going on at the college level and those senior athletes getting sort of an additional year or an extension to their eligibility. Talk to us a little bit of what's going on at the high school level as it relates to those senior athletes that have, in many respects, lost a season or lost their senior year of competition, as well as those junior athletes. How are they reacting to that reality? And what information is coming from the respective high schools, the athletic directors, the administration, or even from the respective high school sport associations?
Well, I think the first thing that our senior athletes are dealing with, something being taken away from them. So we've had to provide extra support for them in helping in those transitions, especially those who were seeking a scholarship to play, whether it be baseball or run track or swim or golf, all of our spring sports. And now they're going to be using all film and anything that was recorded from their junior year. And maybe they were injured their junior year. So now that poses an even bigger problem for them. So those are some issues that we're still trying to deal with and talk with the athlete about, but also some of our students had not even applied to, colleges and universities at this point when we got into this, because they were banking on athletics to help them get to the next phase of their life. Our junior athletes right now, I think, are concerned about what kind of training do I need to be doing now to potentially get ready for the fall, but what happens if my fall season does not take place? What do I need to do? So we're hoping that our state, the UIL, the University Interscholastic League, put some things out in place so that our athletes, our parents, our coaches know what to expect or have an idea of what's to come. Maybe they may shorten some seasons or play dual seasons, whatever it may be, if we go back in the fall or later on into the spring semester. But I know the other thing with the Sports U app, I know that William spoke about, that's something across the state of Texas that our coaches have access, parents, student athletes, and they're posting performance, mental health and wellness suggestions so that everyone has access to that.
Okay. And before we go into, I want Irvin to explain a little bit of what's going on at the college level and sort of how they are managing some of these decisions. But real quick, we had a question from our attendees as to middle school athletes. What do you see as the impact on middle school athletes who are transitioning to high school? And then what are some of those resources and advice? We'll get to those, I think, at the end, but what are some of the impact that you see on middle school athletes who are transitioning to high school, or have you heard of anything at this point?
Well, I haven't heard much other than my conversations with a couple of people, but I think one of the potential impacts is going to be the lack of access to the campus. So their ease of transition on the campus has kind of been removed, and we don't know when that's going to take place, but normally the kids will start visiting campuses at this time of the year, so they become, they familiarize with their surroundings and the environment and kind of learn. And in our state, in the summer, the middle school athletes are a part of the training that takes place in the summer, strength and conditioning. So for those athletes, that's also another introduction to campus life, and you get to socialize and engage with not only your future teammates, because you have these feeder schools that are merging into one, but you also get to engage with coaches and administrators when there's a smaller population size on campus. So you're not going from your small class size to 3,000 kids. Right now these kids are just going to get dropped in the middle of the ocean.
Okay. Wow. So it's a lot that we're seeing at all levels. Obviously, these young people are then going to be moving and transitioning into the college level. Some of the questions I know of concern are, will I get to play? Will I have an opportunity? Will I still be able to obtain a scholarship? So, Mr. Lewis, could you give us some insight on what is going on at the collegiate level, some of the questions or some of the negotiations that are having to take place as it relates to those incoming freshmen?
Well, thank you, Akila. Really, the NCAA is really kind of in flux right now, and it's really going to depend on per conference, per institution, to be honest with you. But some of the questions that you stated, the athletes want to know, will they have a chance to play if they were a senior and they lost a year? Now it's coming up, will they have a fall season? When they ask those questions, pretty much in collegiate athletics, you try to stay a year or two ahead in projecting your budgets.
Okay.
Well, there was nothing in line to project the budget for retaining seniors, super seniors per se, and things of that nature. So, that go back to, okay, now who will take the brunt on to make sure that these super seniors have an extra year to pursue their dreams and things of that nature. So it puts another burden not only on the athletic department, but it puts a burden on the university as a whole, because you do have to make sure you do things politically correct. This is unforeseen for everyone. So how do we manage? And the biggest thing that you have to do in the athletic department, you have to have a unified approach, a unified word, because you're dealing with so many different, here at the University of North Florida, we have about 300 student athletes. We have several international students and things of that nature. So having to send out that unified word to not only them, but to their parents too, as we take on this pandemic. And, the biggest concern I've been hearing of this last week is in regards to our international students, our freshmen that's coming to be here for their very first time. And, coaches who have kind of plugged them into their roster and their rotations for the fall semester, really, they can't say if they'll be here or be in school in time, because who's to say when our country borders open up? Who's to say when their country borders open up? So you really don't know. So as a coach, what do you do? As a parent, what do you do? Do you send your 17, 18-year-old across the country with this pandemic going on? And it's still a lot of uncertainty out there. So it's a lot of questions that really we can't answer at the time, but the one thing we can do is kind of give them a sense of normalcy in regards to, hey, continue to work and use this time really to do a lot of self-assessment and self-investment. For our current student athletes, you know, are you where you need to be academically? Do you have a plan for life after the game, after the ball stopped bouncing per se?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing for our incoming student athletes. You know, do they have a plan where they want to be when they arrive, what they want to do when they arrive? So the mental aspect and the mental capacity and getting them ready to be a collegiate athlete is important. But you always got to take kind of a silver lining out of it all, because these are unprecedented times, and the silver lining is this is just another opportunity to get better at whatever you're lacking, whatever you like to improve on in those areas. That's what we kind of like to encourage and empower our student athletes as well as our staff to do.
Okay, thank you. Haley, if you could help us pick up on that. Again, you're a former student athlete at the University of Texas, so you know the life that these athletes are experiencing, even the recruitment process. You're also the current coach, again, recruiting coordinator. Share with us some of how COVID-19 has affected your daily operations, even with regard to recruiting.
I think knowing how I was as an athlete and our schedule that we had, that, you know, we didn't have as much free time, or it was set to, okay, I'm not going to get my free time till later on. This has been a hard adjustment for a lot of kids. They're so used to their coach saying, okay, from 6 to 8 we have practice, and here to here you have class, and here to here you have study hall. And I think that's kind of a big adjustment to our kids. And when it comes to the academic side too, they're so used to having academic advisors sitting down with them and talking about their classes and being able to have access to tutors and different things, that now that I feel like they're kind of struggling in that sense of, you know, how do I understand this class more if I, you know, can't go and have a one-on-one personally in face-to-face with my professor or my TA, or examples like that. Recruiting wise for volleyball, right now, this is our biggest time. Usually there's a tournament every weekend that I'm on the road recruiting at with over 400 or 500 teams. And that's at a halt right now, obviously. And we don't know if we're going to have that back. So normally the season is from January until 4th of July weekend. So for us, trying to kind of handle that is tough, because then kids are wondering, okay, well, how do we recruit? So a lot of us right now are just phone calls, text messages, emails. In the volleyball world, you're not allowed to reach out or receive phone calls from freshmen or sophomores. They can email you, and that's about it. You can talk to their club coaches. And then juniors and seniors, there's a deadline once you can start talking to them. So right now, our biggest thing is social media and video. And we've been doing a lot of virtual tours here on campus, where, you know, normally kids are coming on official visits or unofficial visits right now, and we're not able to do that either. So these kids are trying to figure out and not panic. And I guess a lot of kids sometimes are in this mode of, okay, now I have this one offer, I need to commit now, instead of really taking the time. And so they're not having that option to go look at schools, to go really talk to coaches more, get that one-on-one, talk to the girls. So I think that's the biggest struggle with the recruiting part of it right now.
Okay. Coach Sage, briefly give us some rundown on how are things looking in the world of swimming and diving, and just some backstory. You've got 12 seniors. So in the young women that are graduating, what does that look like with regards to recruiting? And will that have to be a new mode of operation in that process, or what are your thoughts?
Well, we're in a pretty similar situation with Haley. This would be a time of the year in California. It's high school season for the high schools, or high school swim season. So we would normally be out watching championships, seeing people swim in person, doing practice visits. So we've been reviewing a lot of video Luckily, a lot of the swimmers that we're recruiting have video that we can check out their technique, their strokes, but it's definitely changed things. We've got a virtual tour we've been running through with some of our recruits. This past fall, we walked around campus and took a ton of pictures to send to an international recruit that we were talking to. And so we've been using those and really trying to give our recruits a sense of what the campus is looking like and trying to give them a little bit more of a verbal story about what it's like, since we're not really going to be able to take people in on recruiting trips for the time being.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So a lot of what you all have shared is this notion of transition. Dr. Miller, I want you to kind of come in and give us some insight onto what does this mean with regards to transition and the transition that our young people are facing today. And I want to pull up the slide that I know that you have about, yes, it's talking about transitioning out of college sports, but how much of this even pertains to those that are leaving college sports, obviously, but those that are going to be leaving high school athletics and transitioning into that college space. Could you give us some overview of this information that you've provided?
Absolutely. And so it's a beautiful graphic, and I want to thank the good folks at Stanford University, their sports psychology team put this together. So I like to give credit where credit is due. But when we're thinking about transitions, and someone asked a question about middle school, I have an 8th grader who his track season is no more, and he is now focusing on the transition into high school. And so I'm acutely aware of some of the differences and some of the nuances, but also some of the same things. And so what we do talk about is, working with student athletes who are transitioning. Thankfully, the NCAA granted many of the student athletes at the college level a 6th season, and now that hopefully decreases some of the anxiety. But beginning to reflect upon that athletic career, that's so significant, because when we work with athletes who, for example, football, I work with a lot of football players. And what I tell them is your career could end any day, whether it be on a practice field, whether that be, playing basketball with the Greeks over at the Greek house in the spring. Your career could end on a Saturday afternoon with 100,000 people cheering for you. You have to appreciate your role and your ability to compete at every level. And thankfully, I have had the opportunity to work with college athletes, professional, retired athletes, developmental athletes, as well as high school athletes. So I know retirement sucks. I retired and then, didn't know what to do with myself. So thinking about the moments, the importance of being a student athlete, the things that you take away from the training. And then what I've told guys who were moving toward their final game, or for student athletes who I got one more competition, is I want you to break that down to practices. How many practices do you have left? And I want you to really focus on enjoying whatever you love about the game that brought you to the game. Take it out in every practice, every individual practice. And so those are some of the things I really begin helping them reflect upon their career, and then coping, talking to them about coping strategies, reminding themselves, again, the positive aspects of transition. So speaking with a student athlete today, we talked about what are your post-athletic goals. And we begin to talk about graduate school. What does that look like? What does it look like to begin the application process to graduate school, which probably, and I told her, it's probably going to start in about 3 months. And so really engaging with them about what is life like after sports. The earlier you begin to talk about these things, the more normalizing you are. In terms of, that's got to come from coaches, that's got to come from administrators, that's got to come from maybe family members, but you want it in a very positive message of, hey, once you transition from sport, again, as a parent of a 14-year-old, I tell them, okay, what's life like after sports for you? And like most boys, I want to play professional. Okay, well, what about life after that? Tell me what else you want to do. And then strengthening social support, again, going back to your peers, your coaches, your teammates. Now, this is going to be more indicative of the work I do with the retired athletes. It's really great. I work at Tulane University, and we have a PAC clinic, a professional athlete care team. And we get an opportunity to see retired athletes come to see us weekly. And it's really cool to see them come in their regalia, representing the teams they play for. And the most special thing about that is when they come and they see other guys they played with, and they see guys, man, that they haven't seen in 10, 15 years. But what draws them together is you play for the Patriots, you play for the Browns, the Colts. And to see that level of camaraderie exist after, seasons and all the cheering is over, that's huge. And so when we're talking about transitioning out of sports, pay attention to the social networks that you build with coaches, the trainers, the academic counselors. I mean, all of the people who help you perform. I think that's part of your social reality that many student athletes really don't think about it until they transition. And then also making plans for the future. And this is the importance of career development. This is the importance of internship programs for student athletes. This is the importance of study abroad opportunities, because we want to begin to help transition student athletes from the very beginning. And so I always think about it from this perspective. When we think about contact sports, one of my athletic trainers told me once that the highest percentage of concussions came from female soccer players and cheerleaders. And so when we're thinking about concussions, it's just a segue here. Thinking about concussions, you don't think about female soccer players, but I've seen some female soccer players, their career was over because of concussions. And so when we think about it, we can't just stereotype that only the quote unquote revenue generating sports have to figure out this transitional piece. It's everyone in the sport, in the athletic department. And so there should be a comprehensive program that's based around what happens after sport. I've seen some of the NCAA's efforts on this, and I think that's very positive, but those things should really be insulated and inculcated within the athletic program culture.
Good. Thank you so much for that. And I think you brought up a lot of good things. Particularly, we had a question from the audience about, what is the role of educators? And I think you highlighted the importance of stressing internships, the importance of taking advantage of those opportunities. So if any of you are out there as academic advisors, working with athletes to talk about the benefits of internship, to do that volunteering, to really delve deep into some of those classes and make sure that you're strengthening your skill set, not only academically, but even, like we say, some of those soft skills to get you moving in the next direction. One of those soft skills, I think, is also just the socialization. One of the interesting pieces is that, again, we've heard from all of the news and the administrators and the policies that are being passed down, but I think there's also value in being able to understand the stories of individuals that are happening. One great thing that was been on this past week, we've seen a lot of athletes sort of sharing their story. Allison Felix shared her story. DeMar DeRozan had a conversation on Instagram with a psychologist and really kind of talking about some of the challenges he was facing, but that his teammates have as well. The Women's Sports Foundation this past Saturday hosted a forum where a number of iconic athletes, Billie Jean King, Carly Lloyd, that were on there sort of sharing their story. I wanted to take a moment real quick to share the story of Allison Felix and just give us some understanding of that, and then go to Coach Sage to sort of share some of the things that he's done and creating a platform for his athletes to share. I'm going to cue that up here shortly.
Do you hear that? The grinding noise? That's the sound of my shoes crunching on the street outside my house. It's gravel. It's not good on my knees. But this is where I'm training now that the Summer Olympics have been postponed because of the novel coronavirus pandemic. I measure off my own distances and place markers on the side of parked cars. My husband holds our 15-month-old daughter while he hand times me on his iPhone. It's not ideal. But each of us has seen our lives disrupted and upended in ways we never could have imagined. We're all scared and anxious. I'm 34 and running as fast as ever. But how will I feel at 35? I still want to make my 5th Olympic team. The goal hasn't changed. I want to win. The last 2 years have been the hardest and the best years of my life. I got married to my husband, Kenneth. My daughter, Cameron, was born. But it wasn't the ideal birth I'd planned on. At 32 weeks, my doctors discovered I had a dangerous condition called preeclampsia. My life and my daughter's life were in immediate danger. I had an emergency C-section. Then we spent a month in the NICU. It tested us in ways you can't imagine. I had no idea if I'd ever run again, because the only thing that mattered was getting Cameron home safely. But we made it through. And Cameron was there cheering for me last September when I won my 13th World Championship, the most of any track and field athlete. The support I felt after that race meant everything. I'm still amazed that we made it to the other side. That's why I stood up and spoke out for the rights of female athletes who weren't being supported when they became pregnant. It's why I parted ways with my longtime sponsor and still don't have a new footwear sponsor. If anything, speaking out and advocating for women has given me a new sense of purpose. So I'm gonna keep standing, keep running, keep training. On the streets outside my house, on the grass along San Vicente Boulevard. It'll be a while before I race in front of a crowd again. So if you see me running by, feel free to cheer. Your support means everything.
So, Allison Felix, great athlete, phenomenal athlete, highly accomplished. As I said, we've had athletes starting to share their stories. And I had the great opportunity to meet with Coach Sage athletes last Friday. He welcomed me in. But we've had some great interactions at San Jose State University, just talking with those young women from the time I got there to even last week, seeing them grow, but also been able to engage with them in different ways to have them share their story and create those opportunities. They've even, a few of them have gone out, Jax, shout out to you and Malia, and done some social justice work, speaking on Martin Luther King Day, going to Heritage Home, one of our local homeless shelters, and working with women and doing some women empowerment. Coach Sage, could you share with us a little bit about the platform and the forum that you created to allow your young women to sort of share their voice and share their experiences?
Yeah, it was definitely a transition and an evolution. Way back in 2006, at the end of my first season coaching at San Jose State, was when it really hit me, the struggles that these women were having transitioning out of the sport. And it's definitely been an evolution trying to figure out the best way to prepare them for the transition without sabotaging their senior year. And I think that's kind of the trick in our sport. One of the good things and one of the things that can be a little bit of a trap is they have their exact times to 100th of a second. Every competitive situation is pretty similar in terms of it's very set, defined boundaries. And we've been lucky enough that we had, I think, 5 years in a row where our seniors went out with lifetime best performances, which was definitely a challenge to get there. And we look at each class a little bit differently in terms of trying to prepare them for what's coming, and also really listen to them with what their needs are. In my introduction, you had mentioned Marissa DeWalms, and she was definitely one of the stars of our program. And with her, I learned a lot. And in her case, learned that often the ones that are the most stoic, the quote unquote toughest, and are saying that they're the most fine, often are the ones that maybe need a little extra help, a little extra attention. And with this group, as you saw last Friday, we really tried to bring in outside voices, outside resources to talk to them. I think we've had some around 7 or 8 different women come in and speak to the team at various times this year. We've had a couple of alumni come in and tell their stories, people such as yourself and Juliet and Aaron who've given their time. And we really try to, on my end, I put my most attention into our seniors and our freshmen. The freshmen are having a pretty trying transition themselves, coming into college from high school. And I think that they're a group that I'm still trying to figure out how to help the most. But a lot of it's just connecting. And with the seniors, I've been with them for 4 or 5 years for the most part. So there's a rapport and a trust that's been built up. And I think that that's a lot of it, is they have to know that I'm completely behind them and I'm going to get whatever resources I can to help them.
Great, great. And speaking of those resources, Haley, we've had a little bit of conversation. Could you tell us about some of the things that you've been doing, or some strategies that you have shared with your young women? But before you do that, even if, Irving, you could share, again, from an administrator's perspective, what do you think are some things that athletes could do in this time to take advantage of this time in this transition? And then I want to follow that up with Haley, sort of to share some of her thoughts and strategies on this as well. Volume.
Thanks, Keino. I think the video you just showed with Alice and Felix is exactly what we're encouraging our student athletes to do right now. Really, when you talk about self-assessment and self-investment, now we're having more and more Zoom calls and student athletes kind of telling their story per se, instead of letting the sport dictate who they are. I think they're really finding themselves in what's truly important to them, both academically and athletically. We having a lot of student athletes now reaching out to our sports performance team to talk about their nutrition, diet during this time. You know they have limited places to work out, but they want to do something to come back better than where they were, better than they were before this pandemic hit. Really, I think it also leads to the student athletes developing more and more relationship with all the other entities of the department. Now the sport administrators are really getting to know their student athletes instead of having that bi-weekly meeting with their head coaches. Now you're on Zoom calls with the coaches, the staff, and the student athletes. And so having that chance to build that kind of relationship and community with the student athletes and the coaches and coach staff has been phenomenal. Has really helped with parents asking questions and administrators being able to have the student athletes informed. Also has been really a lifesaver for us.
Okay. Haley, could you go ahead and share some of the work that you've been doing and things that you've created, again, as another resource in a way that coaches could be able to use as a tool to work with their athletes?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna, let me share my screen. Let's see. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So before we started, I was trying to figure out, what I was going to wear. I'm like, ooh, should I dress up? Should I look like a coach? Whatever. And the shirt that I have on, and I saw it, this was kind of perfect for that. There's no better than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lessons on how to improve your performance the next time. So with that, I thought it came in kind of perfect with the SWOT analysis that I've kind of been using with my athletes. And not only do I use this for now, but we can also, coaches can use this for game time, before season, after season, to reflect on how they are individually. And so obviously it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so what I did is kind of took it into how I'm using it and for the example, but how kids can use this to try to figure out what life after sports kind of is for them. So obviously strengths for me, I'm able to be a full-time mom. I have a 9-year-old that lives in Iowa with my mom when I am playing professionally. and when I'm coaching too. So spending time with him. I also have my 3-year-old nephew here with me. So getting to spend time with family that I normally don't get because I'm recruiting. I'm able to focus on self-care. And I think when we think of self-care, it's always more of a mental aspect. For me, my self-care has been, okay, I want to stop putting heat on my hair. I want to be able to wear my hair curly. And so how can I help myself with that? So Googling and doing the research on that stuff. And then being able to video chat and talk to my family more, which when I'm recruiting, when I'm on the road, I'm not getting to talk to them. When I was overseas, I was on a 13-hour time change or an 8-hour time change. And so now that I have that opportunity, now I can use that. My weaknesses, I'm not able to have time training with my players. So right now we're normally in spring season, we get our kids a couple hours a week. We're working more individually, and I don't get that. I'm not able to have the face-to-face time with them, which I've only met them one time. And so how can I build a relationship with kids who have literally only seen me for a 2-hour time span and didn't get to ask me any questions? I'm not able to be out recruiting, which I talked about a little bit. Working out at home is sometimes hard. I would rather be in a gym, and I know a lot of people are the same way. I've gone back and forth with, do I want to buy a Peloton bike or something that actually motivates me to do something instead of, okay, well, how do I use these bands? And for us who are parents, homeschooling is hard work. 2 snaps for the teachers, because math is different now. I don't know how they're doing 4th grade math anymore. I've had to do more Zoom time and phone calls with my son's teacher because I have no idea. So those are my weaknesses, and being able to write these out, I think, has helped me. What are my opportunities? Obviously, Zoom is a lifesaver. I'm getting to sit in on webinars like this, learn from friends, mentors, colleagues, professionals. I'm learning more about my players outside of the court, helping them learn more about the game mentally. So what we're doing is we're watching, it's almost like volleyball school. And so we're watching old film, we're watching professional players, we're watching the national team and seeing kind of what they're seeing in their eye view, so that when we get on the court, we're not just physically better than people, that we're mentally better. And then again, I'm getting more time to spend on self-care. And the biggest thing, I'm helping my players and other athletes figure out what they want to do after sports. And that's kind of what we've kind of talked about. So high school wise, these are some examples that kids can do. Now is the time to reach out to coaches. Again, all of us coaches are doing our recruiting right now. We're watching film, we're texting athletes, calling athletes. The biggest thing I would say is send coaches recruiting emails. And a lot of times kids don't know that because some parents pay for this expensive recruiting app and they've been using that, and that does it everything for them. So actually making it from yourself. So making sure that you list your name, your graduation class, your position, your GPA, your test scores, coaches information, and some game film. And so I kind of, and this will obviously be sent, but just something simple to where you're talking about yourself, and you're getting the right information out there, instead of, I've had a couple kids that said, hi coach, I want to go to Tarleton and here's my email. Or they haven't done their research and they are still emailing and adding the old assistant coach's name in there. So they're not doing the research. Another thing is kids can focus on what they want in a college program. This is what I did when I was doing my recruiting process. Sat down and I made the pros and cons. So every time I went on a visit, then I could write my pros and my cons. And then when it came down to making that decision, then I was able to say, this school, the pros outweighed the cons way more than this school's. And this is one big con that I don't want to have to deal with. And then once you are able to go out and recruit, then you can kind of use that. And I think the last one, do your research on the programs that you're interested in. Find out how many kids they have in that position. Find out, you know, how long the coaches have been there. Who are their sponsors? Who are their support systems? The administration that are in there. I think a lot of kids just, for example, you know, in Texas, they want to go to the power schools because they're Texas. So they want to go to Texas because it's Texas. And they don't really research and find out more about the program. And then for parents and coaches, I saw this tweet and I thought it was perfect. Navigating life after sport isn't just a struggle for recent grads. There are 30-year-olds walking around who believe that all they can do is hoop or coach. And I think that's huge for all of us right now, is figuring out after sports life. And I feel that now as admin and coaches, we need to prepare for this no matter what. We shouldn't have to wait for a pandemic to actually really think about how we're going to help our kids in this situation. And then the biggest thing is threats. You know, what are my threats coming on right now? Some athletes and people are struggling mentally, emotionally. There may not be a club season for recruiting. There's talks of not having a fall season. We may be online for a year. Does that mean no athletics for the year? Are all sports going to get an additional season? So with fall sports, are our kids then going to get the NCAA year added? What does this mean for high school athletes? What does this mean for 2020 seniors? I know, when it comes to normally times right now, kids are taking ACT and SAT tests. Well, if we can't do that, how does that affect? And then, we don't know when we can start training. So how is that going to affect our season?
Great. Thank you for that information and giving us some insight on some of the things that you do during this process. One of the things I want to just get a quick soundbite from each and every one of you. Have you been able to sort of communicate and touch base with your athletes? We know, Sage, that you've done that. Haley, that you've done that. Irv, is this taking place at your institution? I think you talked about some of those meetings taking place. Not only have you done it, but how have the students reacted? Could you give us some quick response from Dr. Miller, Goodloe's, as well as Lewis? What has been the response to that interaction? Has it been positive? Are they taking advantage of it, or is there some pushback?
It's been positive for the most part. I'll say I'm working with Tulane Athletics. Still got some guys I wish they would call. I wish they would send me a text back. But for the most part, folks, my men and women athletes, they've been very responsive.
Okay, great.
And then we've set up a Zoom meeting with our kids once a week because they've been bombarded with meetings from all of their teachers.
Okay.
So we give them one time throughout the week so they can come and speak with us. But if they need more time, they shoot us an email or text or remind to let us know, look, Ms. Goodloe, I really need help. Okay, so yesterday I was on the phone for an hour with one of my kids because she's become mom in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So all those responsibilities have fallen on her because her parents need help with that communication piece.
Right.
Absolutely. And I just do periodic check-ins with the guys that I've coached and the guys that I know. So
okay.
at least twice a week.
Yeah. I know we're broaching our time. We're actually going to push it a little bit because there's some other great resources that I want to send. So if our audience can just hang in there, I see your questions coming in as well. So I want to make sure that we have time to answer that. One of the things I know that we've also talked about with our teams, at least at the college level, and the conversations that we've had on this platform as Dr. Miller joined us this past, our first program that we had, is just the importance and the value of a sports psychologist, a sport counselor, a social worker in sport. And I wanted Dr. Miller to sort of share some of that insight because I think it can be beneficial at all levels that we're dealing with and help parents to sort of cope with some of that as well. So I wanted to share a little bit of, or have Dr. Miller share a little bit of his insight on this important aspect as we're finding as it relates to mental health, about ingratiating this other member of the team or expanding the team to include this mental health, well-being, and performance aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be very brief here. So when you look at what we call the mental health continuum, I can't speak to this enough. I mean, it's a collaborative effort between doctors, providers, social workers, academic counselors. We all kind of step in here, and we are fortunate enough to work with many really great human beings. But just to kind of talk about it more briefly, when we're dealing with more acute situations, sometimes there's a need for medication, there's a need for a medication consult. That's where we use more of a psychiatric lens. When it's more sport and performance, particularly when we're talking about how to make the most of some of this time, you may consult with a sports psychology consultant. But throughout the gamut, we all kind of step in there where it's something maybe mild, something moderate, something maybe very benign. It could be isolation. It could be a number of different things. So I just want to kind of make sure this gets a little bit of love, because there's a continuum where many people are coming together to really work with these student athletes, but this is not exhaustive of the professionals who help support student athletes. So we'll pull to the next slide here.
Yes.
As we continue to talk about, athletes might present either in a distressed or whether they're stable or well. And so we want to be able to establish a line of communication, whether they are in distress. We don't want to just see people when the world is falling, all right? We want to be able to have a dialogue and a communication with student athletes. I want to see folks on recruiting trips. And so to Haley's point, recruiting is very important. So with our swimming and diving team, when I was at NC State, we were in those recruiting meetings, talking to parents, talking with young athletes, and I'm sure they thought they would never come and see us, right? Unless it's about performance. But if I can get you in the door with performance, I can get you talking about a number of different things that are impacting you as a whole being. And so this is just to kind of illustrate, again, how we see athletes, whether they're in distress, whether they're presenting as stable, or we consider them to be as well, and just to check in. So that's important. Possible causes of distress, which we all know many of these things, but I'm kind of highlighting some of the bolded areas. Academic demands at a rigorous institution could be a Power 5, could be a D2. Bottom line is there's academic demands that may be different from what the expectations were at the high school level, or for my son, the junior high level. Interpersonal relationships, a lot of folks in that area of 18, 19, 20, 21, really navigating what it looks like to have close interpersonal relationships. That could be detrimental from a coach standpoint, from a friend, teammate, from a professor. There could be challenges in that student athlete's life that they didn't anticipate. Again, talking about distress, stable, well, you just never know how those things are going to present. And then obviously playing time. I've met a lot of athletes they've come to the institution very excited, get redshirted, and the second season, no playing time. It's going to impact them because, again, as Haley even talked about, their athletic identity is so wrapped up. We talk about identity foreclosure to what they do as a performer. They're not possibly looking at the full experience and maybe what that education and what they're going to be able to really contribute after their career is over. So playing time is just a momentary thing that can really impact them. And then obviously injury. As I talked about this briefly earlier, you just never know when it's your last play. And so for those who are dealing with chronic injury or season-ending injury, that could be one of the areas of distress we see commonly and quite often. We have groups around injured athletes getting back on the playing field or successfully transitioning out of sport. I think the next slide is here. When to refer. For those who are not mental health professional, it's okay. You still have a role here, because obviously we don't want an athlete to isolate themselves. We don't want a student athlete to go and feel like they can't talk to someone. The importance of a mental health professional is the confidentiality piece. That's the real difference between an academic counselor, a coach, or a professor. We're bound by certain guidelines where confidentiality must be maintained with few exceptions. And so when an athlete talks about helplessness, loneliness, suicidal ideation, a plan, or they're isolating themselves, excessive drug use, rebellious behavior. I had a student athlete, I think he broke his PlayStation and he ended up coming to see me. We talked about isolation, personality change. If you know this particular athlete has been very upbeat, very jovial throughout the season, and you notice a significant shift, that may be you helping them get to someone who can help them a little bit more, or either offer a referral. And then obviously personal appearance. Some of the things we notice, how a person keeps their locker. That's an indication of personal distress. If you see a shift or a change, that may be a simple question by a teammate or anyone. Hey, how's everything going? So things about, I want to kind of, people will have these slides and they can kind of ask questions later. I just want to be concise. The people who know these athletes best are the people who have an opportunity to make referrals, athletic trainers. So just a list here. I want really coaches, trainers, anyone on this call, administrators, really think about it. I want to normalize mental health, right? And the slide should be titled, let's destigmatize mental health by expanding the team. So talk about in terms of time, location, you know, when is it convenient to really talk to them? Sometimes you don't want to quote unquote out anyone by talking about something that might be pretty shameful, pretty embarrassing, let me say that. Talk about comfort with mental health. And so for some, that may mean disclosing that you've actually talked to a mental health professional or you've used mental health services in the past. Be persistent, you know, and I like this particular bullet point because, you know, this is when coaches bring us in to talk to the team at the very beginning of the season and throughout the season. I like being on the sideline when there's nothing else happening. So being persistent and consistent is what I like to say. We want to be seen, and then when the resources are required, the coach is familiar or the trainer is familiar with how to make that referral. And then more importantly, make it easy for them. This is the significance of being an embedded part of the athletic department, because we want them to be able to turn a corner and just come knock on the door and say, hey, can I schedule an appointment? I'd like athletes who self-refer as well as those who are referred. And so lowering the barrier to mental health services is critical to being able to raise utilization. I've talked about confidentiality, of course. And so I feel like that's most important. So those are some of the things we talk about as far as expanding the team through destigmatizing mental health services, and all are involved. When student athletes, when high school athletes, so I still work with high school athletes, these are things we're helping them normalize these services by addressing, you know, I say stigma. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. And to all of our panelists, you know, have you seen some of this take place? Have you seen a need for, or have you already incorporated a therapist or counseling notion into your day-to-day with your athletes?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. We've already incorporated that. We have a social worker on our campus she's already created a Google Classroom that's available to all of our students, especially our athletes, because they access.
And that's good because it ties in that notion of normalizing it. So it's great to hear that that's going, and we're not doing it from only in cases of urgency, but starting that and introducing that to those young people early on, which I think is helpful, definitely at the college level. Mm. Mr. Lewis, did you have any questions?
Yes, I was about to say, we've incorporated that with our sports performance team also. You know, when they're looking for those workouts, we also send the information out with our sports performance team that we have a clinical psychologist here on campus that works with us, and she has several interns that works with us also. So sending that information out with the sports performance team, nutrition, academics, all of it ties in together. So that's an important piece.
Sage.
We have Dr. Butrin on campus that's worked with some of our athletes over the years. And then we really encourage anyone that's having any issues, struggles, to reach out to our counseling service on campus. And we've had Colleen Johnson, who's a counselor with CAPS on campus, speak with the team before and try to normalize it as much as possible, as Dr. Miller said, and destigmatize it, and really encourage people to seek out help.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that, because I think one of the things is for us to normalize the interaction and the notion of having that counselor, of having that psychologist, so it becomes part of your day-to-day. I know during my time as a student athlete, I came in injured. So, you know, was already from day one set up in sort of that sort of system. But I think it's one of, you know, knowing who those people are, as Dr. Miller said, from even the recruiting process, and to engage them. So I encourage all athletic teams, if you have it, again, within your budget or within your purview, to incorporate that individual as a part of your team staff in your day-to-day interactions. There's a number of questions coming in that we're going to get to shortly. But while individuals are submitting those questions, I wanted to take an opportunity for some of those other resources. So Haley, I really appreciate, we've got a lot of feedback from our audience about that SWOT analysis. Was great to be able to look at self. Dr. Miller, that was also great, sharing that continuum, being able to understand what does it look like. I think for some, it's not understanding fully, you know, we hear these terms, athletic identity foreclosure and, you know, mental health and depression and anxiety, but what does it look like? How is an individual acting day to day? How can I tell? And talking about, again, how normally everything is neat, their locker is messy, you know, all of a sudden we're starting to see a shift. They used to dress up, you know, take some self-pride, now we're starting to see them shift in that behavior. So I think some of those things are really good. One of the resources I wanted to share is from the Goodloes, and being able to talk about some of the things that you've done with regards to Behind the Whistle, and sharing some of those resources and ways to perhaps engage high school athletes and create some structure in this time period right now. As we know, again, you have this consulting company, it provides those tools necessary for developing that whole person. Even in this notion of what we're sort of experiencing now is this notion of trauma. And so how can we be the change agent? Could you share a little bit about what you've put together in these next few slides?
Yes, we kind of borrowed from University of Louisville. They do something similar with their student athlete development department, but we wanted it to be focused on our athletes in high school. So the Monday through Sunday kind of different things that they can do outside of athletics, but also staying connected with that academic side of things, like researching colleges and universities and finding out which ones are accepting, not accepting SAT scores at this moment or for the next couple of years now. So just writing letters of gratitude to their people in their home to help get them into that mindset of, you know what, I'm grateful that I'm able to spend some time with my family, because I think a lot of our students have expressed that, like I get to hang out with my brother and sister now, or I see my grandmother a little bit more now because they're in the home, and some other ways for them to take care of themselves. We also put together a list of some books to give our students access to some good information, takes them away from, you know, their core content that they're so bombarded with. But this also helps our coaches.
Thank you.
It helps with our coaches as well to help them develop some of these, you know, it helps them read for pleasure now that they have some extra time on their hands. And then the last, some ideas for some TED Talks and podcasts that we recommend, you know, as they're going out on a walk, or they just want to, you know, they want to listen to some of the people to help develop some of these transferable skills and soft skills that you talked about earlier.
Right. So yes, there's a number of resources available. I hope that individuals in our audience, again, you coaches, parents, athletes, are taking in some of this. This presentation, again, will be available for you within the week, as well as a rebroadcast of the webinar. So definitely take advantage, spread the word. This information and resources will be available, as well as the PowerPoints that Coach Eckerman and Dr. Miller provided as well. One of the questions that we had coming in from Landon here, the recruitment process is a large contributing factor for how and why the transition is challenging for many student athletes, something I've seen as a former student athlete at a large university. But what role do you all see, and any one of you can take this question, what role do you see athletic departments and staff having in revamping the recruitment process to make expectations tangible for post-program life in regards to the student athlete? So what things have you done in your respective departments, or even as your own coach and perhaps team, to create this life after sport dialogue and understanding with your student athletes? say Coach Sage or Herb? Do you have
Well, one of the things we've really been focusing on lately is trying to paint the picture of resources they're going to have as they're getting close to graduating in terms of internships, and then what different, if they're talking to us about certain majors, certain careers, try to really paint a picture of what that would look like and how they would get there and what we can do to help bridge that gap and make it happen.
Well, Keino, kind of the same thing. One thing we really focus on, especially the sports in which I'm the sports supervisor, is getting them to understand that every day you're on the interview and taking that approach to it all. And at the end of the day, we want to do so much community service and get them involved in other areas throughout the university and the communities, so it'd be an easier transition, not waiting until their junior or senior year to do internships. We really try to encourage that early and often as possible, because we all know that there will be life after the game.
Right. And I think Anthony, one of our guests, posed that question about the role of educators in sort of supporting that student athlete. So great question, and thank you all for answering that. Do we have anyone else that wanted to share some of the things that they're doing to engage their athletes in this process, life after sport, and being able to see themselves as a whole athlete? Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the things that I wanted to share before we close out and get sort of a final 1 to 2 takeaways that you want the audience to gain from this is just understanding that there are a few more resources out there that are available to our athletes. So for the past 2 webinars, we've had some great guests and great psychologists on hand. Again, Dr. Miller, thank you for coming back to that. But Dr. Luke Patrick and Dr. Jeff Porter also provided some additional resources from an institutional and organizational level that are available. So the University of Michigan has one called Athletes Connected. There's another one that discomfort you're feeling is grief. So again, some great articles and resources to understand and acknowledge. Some may be going through a grief model and dealing with their current state. Another one is entitled Unfinished Business, 5 Insights When Your Athletic Season is Sidelined by a Pandemic. Again, some great reading to give some insights, 1 to 2 to 3, bullet points that can help us move forward. And then sort of in refocusing and recentering. So the next article on mental imagery as a skill for coping, to go along with what Dr. Miller has proposed and Haley has talked about, of setting those goals, but then to think about it and take the time to have that mental imagery or visualization, if you will. And there's also some resources that the NBA has also put out with regards to dealing with some of the challenges, the mental health challenges during COVID-19. I'll also quickly give a shout out to some of these other mental health resources that are apps, that are trainings, and are opportunities for an athlete to engage on their own. Calm is an app. I've actually used it before. And you listen to someone speaking, some Headspace. I've actually utilized that one as well and fallen right asleep. But it's a way to just calm you down. In addition, on our first week, we had Dr. Emmett Gill, who is a member of the Alliance for Social Workers in Sport. And I'm going to have actually Keino kind of share a little bit of some of the work that they're doing. He's collaborating in an effort to engage athletes. But the Alliance themselves are starting next week, I believe, will have an opportunity for athletes, I believe at the college level and professional level, to obtain a social work certificate. And this is some training that can help them sort of self-guide and help them through this process. So I encourage you all to check out Headspace, Calm, the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport. And then Dr. Miller, if you could share a little bit about some of the work that you're going to be doing forthcoming.
Absolutely. Dr. Emmett Gill and myself and another colleague, we are going to begin hosting Zoom calls particularly targeting African-American male student athletes. And it's about empowerment, less clinical, but really checking in because we recognize that there are some interesting things we're seeing in our community in terms of COVID-19, but also we understand that overwhelmingly, sometimes we don't think about some of the multiple identities. So whether it's Black female, Latinx female, or African-American male, sometimes many of those multiple identities gets lost. And so I've joined, Dr. Gill has suggested that having this Zoom call hosted on Friday mornings at 8:30 Central. And so if anyone is interested in joining in that call or referring an African-American male to that call, just reach out to me or Dr. Gill if you have this information directly. But beyond that, the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport, they're also putting together some Instagram offerings as well as some TikTok offerings. So stay tuned, and those things are coming. So we're trying to engage and reach out and just trying to be present.
And I know you yourself, Dr. Miller, have talked about in identifying and locating a sports psychologist or a therapist, the notion of, you know, having that individual be culturally competent, understand who that individual is from their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation and identity. And so we want to keep those things in mind as well. I know there's some nuances when it comes to identifying a person to help you. You will be providing us a resource, so we'll see some of those individuals by state, because there's obviously some licensure issues and legalities around servicing an individual. Has to be within sort of your state region, if you will. So
yeah, and just one quick thing to mention, because I'm in Louisiana, but at the same time, I work with student athletes who are in Louisiana. But once my student athlete goes to, let's just say, California, I'm referring them to a provider in California who's licensed in California. That's the standard. Because of COVID-19, the current pandemic, some of that has been laxed a little bit, but it varies by state. So a provider would have that information. And so just if there's a question, a concern, reach out or either talk with your mental health provider, and they'll be able to kind of talk to you about the most up-to-date things that are happening. Everything is just so fluid right now, but we're hoping to be able to meet the needs. We just don't want people just to opt out. We want people to ask the questions, and we're just trying to create spaces where they can feel that, you know, their voices can be heard.
Okay. I have one more question from our audience before we go into final takeaways from you all, our amazing guests. And this goes back to Dr. Miller. As a mental health therapist who works with athletes, how can I or we get more connected with various sports programs to support athletes at various levels? In addition, what is your suggestion and or experience with successfully convincing coaches of the need and value of mental health support for their athletes?
I'll take the second question first. Sadly, you have to pull out the data and the statistics. When we talk about African-American males, we have to talk about athletic socialization, identity foreclosure. You have to talk about the graduation rates. So for some athletes, it looks like this, they graduate, and others, it looks like this. You have to talk about why this is the case. And coaches can have all the good intentions in the world, but you have to let the data speak for itself. And for some who are more resistant, we try to build bridges with coaches and athletic administrators. And the goal simply is, we don't want to talk about when you miss on mental health issues and there are dire consequences. We don't want to talk about that as being the reality. We want to talk about that as being the exception. And so working with coaches and administrators is something that we openly do, because it's an educational process, just like it is for an 18-year-old, you know what I mean? And so how do we do this? We do it by, you know, continue to talk about mental health. DeMar DeRozan and people who are in the limelight talk about these things as if it's nothing to be ashamed of. It has to be normalized and I would argue that the young athletes have to see that the people who they quote unquote look up to are utilizing these services. And that way, when they come to a university, they are saying, hey, do we have this? And on the recruiting visit, hey, do we have this? You have a nutritionist. So mental health is just as important as strength and conditioning. Honestly, it is. And so it has to be pitched that way. It has to be validated and talked about in terms of the budget. And so that's not my area, but I recognize that sometimes there are economic constraints, but we cannot allow some of the dire consequences to exist. We have to fight against that, just like you're fighting against a pandemic.
Great. Thank you. At this time, it's been an amazing panel. I hate that we have to go, but I know that we will definitely, as an institute, be providing some updated reports from our talks. So in the last few minutes here, can I get each of you to share one or two takeaways you want our audience, our athletes, our parents, our fellow coaches to take away with regard to understanding athletes, understanding their understanding their lived experiences, as well as, again, elevating that voice and understanding the importance and relevance of mental health and coping, not only during this time period, but as they continue about their career?
I would say embrace the time that we have right now and utilize it for some things. Use the time to research different avenues that you are interested in now that you have the time. So embrace the time.
I would just say hunt the good in your life. I know that's, I think that's kind of the best thing to do because it helps you maintain a growth focus, a growth mindset versus being focused on things you can't control.
Okay. Dr. Miller.
I would just say, continue to advocate for yourself and find people who can be open and really honest with what's happening right now. This is a time for honesty. And so the reality of the matter is for athletes, student athletes, coaches, and I want to really emphasize that the people who do the work, as you said earlier, Keila, they need, to be talking to someone too. So we have to come together as a community, but also continue to use your voice and find ways, find avenues, find outlets. This is a point in time where we have to be creative in these uncertain times. But we'll be back and we'll be resilient, but that calls for creativity.
And I like that point, which you said, find advocates. So if you're having challenges, find an advocate, somebody that can advocate with you or for you. So I think that's an important component. Coach Sage, what are some final comments, final takeaways?
I agree with what William mentioned in terms of pursuing that growth mindset, staying connected with people, staying active, I think is really important. And then I'm also a big advocate of breath work. And I'd encourage everybody to really, there's a lot of free resources out there, and it can do a lot in terms of your personal mental health, your overall health and immune system, and your physical fitness level, especially when we're probably not all as active as we used to be. The breath work can really help bridge that gap.
Thank you for that breath work. I was actually just going through that with my son, who's 5 yesterday, got real upset. But I'm like, let's breathe. And we did that together. So much value in that. And we can start it at a young age, again, to normalize that behavior. Haley, could you share some final thoughts, one or two takeaways?
I think the biggest two that have popped in my head, obviously figuring out your identity after an athlete, starting that sooner than later, and using this time to figure out who's really on your side and who's there for you. I know we have so many players who are possibly going to the NBA or the draft. Who's really checking in on you right now? Who is making sure you're mentally okay? Not just the people that are like, oh man, now you're not going to get to go in the draft, or you're not going to, who's really asking you, are you okay? How's your family? That part of it. And you'll really start to see who really cares for you. And that's along with coaches. So coaches, then that way you can show that you care for them and you care more about them that besides just being an athlete, that you care about their family, that you care about if they have kids, if they're, whatever is going on in their life. I think that this is the time to really find out who cares about you and figure out who you really care about and who's your priority.
Mr. Lewis, final words, final thoughts, takeaways for our audience.
I think really just embracing the journey and really focusing on winning the day. I'm a big advocate of winning the day because it ultimately leads to champion one's life forever. There's always a silver lining to take away throughout the day. And I kind of focus on the acronym ACE, ACCE, just being the perfect ace, having the perfect attitude, character, communication, and effort. And I really think that can aid to a person just winning the day and being that champion for life forever.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing those final words, from acronyms to strategies to breath, finding those people that are on your team and really there for you. All of that is important. All of the information, slides, and resources that you provided or lived experiences you've shared today, I think will be a wealth of knowledge and some great tips and examples for all of those in this community that work with athletes at all levels. So I thank you so much for that. As I stated, this webinar will be available in a week's time. So we'll have a recording of that. Please share that with family, friends, athletes, such that they can get that information and knowledge. We will also have the corresponding PowerPoints to go with that, again, providing those additional resources. So we welcome you again to visit SJSU, our words to action notion that we talk about here with the Institute for the Study of Sports, Society, and Social Change. We welcome any contributions to be able to continue to push this envelope and have these dialogues, and ask that you reach out either reach me via email, my wonderful executive assistant that's on the other end doing some amazing work, Beth Doyle, as well as our wonderful interns that are working with us. But we thank each and every one of you for joining us today. And if you got questions and want to get some more information about what we're doing here, we invite you to come on out and send us an email and let us know. So thank you again, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you around and checking in with you soon. So take care and be well.
All right, roll wave.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.